In the quiet and dusty streets of Kalonji town, where small houses leaned into one another and life was simple, there lived a young girl named Naledi. She was not the kind of girl who turned heads with expensive clothes or glittering jewelry. She wore old sandals, often mismatched. Her dresses were faded, patched, and worn. But behind her humble appearance was a heart that was kinder, purer, and more beautiful than anything money could buy. Every morning, Naledi would rise before the sun, helping her aging mother prepare a wooden roadside stall. Together, they sold roasted plantains to passers-by. Her hands were rough, her fingers darkened by charcoal, but she smiled through it all. People in the town called her the poor girl, but they didn't know that her heart was rich in love, in compassion, and in quiet strength. She gave food to beggars when they couldn't afford it. She offered kind words to strangers. Even when her own stomach was empty, she never let others feel alone. And yet, no one really saw her. She was just another face in the crowd, until one rainy evening changed everything. As dark clouds gathered in the sky and raindrops began to fall, Naledi was hurriedly covering her plantains and packing up the small stall. Water soaked her dress, but she moved quickly, determined not to let anything spoil the food. That's when her eyes met his. A tall young man stood under a small roof nearby, sheltering from the rain. He wore a sleek jacket, polished shoes, and his car was parked just behind him. He looked completely out of place in the muddy streets of Kalonji. His name was Zubair, son of Mr. Baraka and Madame Zuleika, one of the most powerful and wealthy families in the entire region. He had everything a person could dream of: money, education, status. But in that moment, as the rain poured between them, he wasn't looking at her rags. He wasn't staring at her wet sandals or dirty hands. His eyes saw something else, something warm, something real. He saw a girl who didn't pretend, a girl whose smile, even in the middle of a storm, was brighter than the gold his mother wore every day. Naledi looked back at him, shyly. She wasn't used to rich men looking at her like that. She wasn't used to being noticed at all. But something about the way he stared, not with arrogance, not with pity, but with admiration, made her heart beat a little faster. And from that day, the story of the poor girl with a pure heart and the rich boy with curious eyes began to unfold. A love was about to grow, not from wealth, not from status, but from something deeper, a connection that neither of them saw coming. The people of Kalonji would soon talk. Some would praise it, others would judge it. But one thing was certain: this was the beginning of a story that would shake the walls of pride, expose the ugliness behind wealth, and prove that true love sees beyond class and riches. Because sometimes the richest hearts come from the poorest homes. Days slowly turned into weeks, and Zubair kept returning to that same roadside spot in Kalonji town. But it was no longer the roasted plantains or the accidental shelter from the rain that brought him back. It was her, Naledi, her gentle smile, her humble spirit, her honest laugh. Something about her pulled him in, something deeper than words could explain. Every time he came, he found an excuse to linger. Sometimes he'd ask for just one roasted plantain, even if he never ate it. Other times he'd offer to help her pack up the stall, just to steal a few extra minutes in her presence. And slowly, the awkward silence between them turned into sweet conversations. They started talking about life, about dreams, about things that truly mattered. Naledi, with her soft voice, would speak about her hopes of a better life for her mother. Zubair, with all his wealth, confessed how empty his world felt despite everything he owned. "You're different, Naledi," he told her one day, as they sat under a tree nearby. "You see the world in a way most people don't. You make everything feel simple, honest, real." Naledi blushed, looking down at her hands. "You're the only rich person who ever looked at me like I mattered," she said quietly. "Most just look past me, like I'm invisible." That moment hung in the air like a soft breeze. It was no longer just friendly talk. There was something warm and unspoken between them now. Their eyes met, and a spark quietly ignited. The kind of spark that no riches, no social status, no class barrier could put out. Their hearts began to beat for each other. Their love was not about luxury or appearances. It was about connection, something deeper, something sacred. Zubair loved how genuine Naledi was, how she stayed true to herself. And Naledi loved how he made her feel seen, valued, respected. People began to notice. Some whispered, some laughed, some even warned Zubair. "She's not your level," they said. "What will your parents say?" But he didn't care. Every day, his feelings grew stronger, and so did hers. They shared secret moments, a walk under the sunset, a small flower left at her stall, stolen glances when no one was watching. Their love was blooming in the quietest corners of a noisy world. But love, especially in a world where pride and class matter more than heart, is never left in peace for long. Storm clouds were gathering, not in the sky this time, but in the hearts of those who believed love should have a price tag. Zubair and Naledi didn't know it yet, but their sweet story was about to face its first real test. Because when love dares to cross the line between rich and poor, the world doesn't clap, it fights back. But they held on, because what they had was rare and worth fighting for. The day Zubair finally gathered the courage to tell his parents about Naledi, he thought maybe, just maybe, they would understand. He believed love would soften their hearts. But he was wrong, very wrong. The moment the words left his mouth, "I love Naledi, the girl from Kalonji," a storm erupted inside the mansion. Madame Zuleika jumped to her feet, eyes wide with disbelief and rage. "What? That low-class girl? You must be under a spell," she screamed, her voice echoing through the walls. Mr. Baraka slammed his fist on the table so hard that the glass centerpiece shook and cracked. "Zubair, don't you dare shame this family. Do you even know who you are? You're the heir to the Baraka name. Do you know how many powerful daughters from wealthy families are begging to marry you? And you want to throw it all away for a roadside vendor's daughter?" Zubair didn't flinch. He looked them both in the eyes and said, "I don't want power. I want love. I want Naledi." But they didn't want to hear it. Their hearts were filled with pride and ego. To them, Naledi wasn't a human being with feelings. She was a stain on their family's reputation. They mocked her background. They insulted her clothes, her job, even her scent, calling her a street rat with cheap perfume. They made cruel jokes about her mother, called her family beggars and dirty market people. Madame Zuleika even claimed Naledi was only pretending to love Zubair for his money. "Girls like her always come from the gutters, looking to trap rich boys like you," she hissed. But Zubair stood strong like a rock in a storm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply said, "You can insult me, threaten me, take away everything I own, but you can't take Naledi from my heart." His words only made them angrier. They tried to bribe him, offered luxury cars, foreign trips, even a seat in his father's company, all in exchange for forgetting Naledi. But Zubair refused everything. "I'd rather sell plantains with her than sit on a golden throne with a fake heart," he said calmly. His defiance drove his parents to the edge. They warned him, cursed him, even threatened to disown him. But none of it worked. Zubair's love was too strong. His mind was made up. Behind all the shouting and threats, one truth became clear. Zubair wasn't just fighting for love. He was fighting against a system that judged people by their clothes and background. He was fighting for dignity, for respect, for the right to love someone who didn't wear diamonds, but had a heart made of gold. But his parents weren't done yet. They had one last card to play, something darker, something dangerous. Because when pride is bruised and power is challenged, people don't just walk away quietly. And Naledi, the sweet, innocent girl from Kalonji, had no idea that the people who smiled in luxury houses were now planning something far more cruel. Madame Zuleika was burning with rage. Her son's stubbornness had crossed every line. She had tried yelling, threatening, bribing. Nothing worked. Now her anger turned into something darker. One evening, behind closed doors, she picked up her phone and made a call to someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Mama Jiri, a corrupt and feared herbalist known for her evil ways. When Mama Jiri arrived at the Baraka mansion, the air turned heavy. She wore layers of dark cloth, beads clinking around her neck, her eyes cold and calculating. Zuleika didn't waste time. "I want that girl gone," she said, her voice sharp and bitter. "Whether she leaves this town or this world, I don't care." Mama Jiri nodded slowly, a crooked smile forming on her lips. "Leave it to me." And so, the wicked plan began. First, they sent spies to watch Naledi. Every move she made, every place she went, was reported back to Zuleika. They even paid a woman from the neighborhood to pretend to be Naledi's friend, only to dig for information and feed it to them. Nothing was sacred anymore. Naledi's life was under a shadow she couldn't even see. Then came the threats. Anonymous notes began appearing near her stall. "Leave Zubair, or suffer. You don't belong in his world. You'll regret this." Even her mother received one, stuffed under the front door, wrapped in black thread. But Naledi, though shaken, refused to bow. Her spirit was strong. "If love must fight to survive," she told her mother, "then I will fight." Zubair begged her to stay safe. He offered to take her away from Kalonji, but Naledi stood firm. If I run now, they'll win. I won't let their hatred break us. Seeing their scare tactics fail, Madame Zuleika and Mama Jiri decided to go further, darker. They paid a group of thugs to follow Naledi late at night. One evening, as she was walking home from the market, she noticed footsteps behind her. She quickened her pace, clutching her basket tightly. The street was quiet, only the sound of the wind and her heartbeat filling the air. Suddenly, 2 men appeared from the corner, blocking her path. Another came from behind. Her heart dropped. They didn't speak. One reached for her arm, but before anything worse could happen, a nearby shopkeeper's dog started barking wildly, and lights came on in nearby homes. The thugs quickly disappeared into the shadows. Naledi ran home trembling, but alive. Zubair was furious. He wanted to call the police, but Naledi stopped him. Your parents will only deny everything. They'll find another way. We have to be smart. But the attack was just the beginning. Behind closed doors, Mama Jiri was already preparing something far more dangerous. A charm, a poison, something that would not leave bruises but could destroy from within. They had crossed the line from hatred to attempted murder, and Naledi's life was now in real danger. One sunny afternoon, Madame Zuleika did something no one expected. She invited Naledi to the mansion. She wore a fake smile, her voice unusually soft and welcoming. "Naledi, my dear," she said sweetly. "Maybe I was too harsh before. Come over. Let's talk like family." Naledi was hesitant. Her heart warned her that something was wrong, but Zubair encouraged her. "Maybe she's finally changing," he said hopefully. So Naledi agreed. She dressed modestly and went to the mansion with a hopeful heart. Madame Zuleika welcomed her with open arms, offering her a seat in the grand living room. "You've grown into a fine young woman," she said, with a false warmth. "I was wrong to judge you. Let's start over." Then she brought a tray with 2 glasses of fresh mango juice. "Let's toast to peace," she smiled. What Naledi didn't know was that one of those glasses was laced with slow poison, carefully prepared by Mama Jiri. It wasn't meant to kill instantly. It was designed to weaken her body, destroy her from the inside, quietly. But fate has a way of turning wicked plans upside down. Just as Naledi reached for her glass, Zubair walked in, cheerful and smiling. "Hey, I'm thirsty," he said playfully, grabbing one of the glasses and gulping it down before anyone could stop him. Within minutes, his smile faded, his body trembled, his eyes rolled back, and suddenly he collapsed to the floor. Naledi screamed in horror, rushing to his side. "Zubair! Zubair! Somebody help!" The mansion turned into chaos. Servants ran in. Mr. Baraka shouted for the driver. Zubair was carried into the car and rushed to the hospital. Naledi sat beside him the entire way, her hands trembling, her face soaked in tears. At the hospital, the doctor ran tests and came back with a chilling diagnosis. Zubair had been poisoned. Naledi's heart sank. Her hands went cold. She looked at Madame Zuleika, who stood in a corner pretending to be shocked. "How could this happen?" Zuleika asked, pretending to cry. Maybe it was food contamination, but Naledi wasn't convinced. Something didn't feel right. The juice came straight from Zuleika's hands. The timing, the invitation, it all pointed to one truth, but she had no proof, and no one would believe a poor girl accusing a wealthy mother. She sat beside Zubair in the hospital room, watching him fight for his life. Her heart was heavy, but her spirit stayed strong. "I will not let evil win," she whispered. Days passed. Zubair slowly began to recover, but Naledi couldn't rest. She kept thinking about that day, the tray, the glasses, the fake smile. And then, fate revealed a clue. One afternoon, one of the young servants from the Baraka mansion secretly came to see Naledi at the hospital. She looked nervous, glancing around before speaking in a whisper. "I saw Madame Zuleika pour something into the juice, and then laugh with Mama Jiri when you left the room," she said, trembling. Naledi's heart skipped a beat. Now, she had the truth. Now, she had proof. Just when things seemed hopeless, fate unfolded another twist. Zubair's younger sister, Mira, who had always admired Naledi's kindness, had been quietly watching everything. Unlike her parents, she had a soft heart, and deep inside, she knew her family had crossed a dangerous line. Mira had heard whispers around the house, strange conversations between her mother and Mama Jiri, and one night, her instincts led her to do something risky. Hidden behind the hallway curtain, she pressed record on her phone as she listened to a chilling conversation. In the dark silence, her mother's voice echoed through the room. "Cold, cruel, and full of hatred. She must die quietly, Zuleika whispered to the herbalist. No one should trace it back to us. I don't care how you do it, just make her disappear. Mira's hands shook as she stopped the recording. Her heart was racing, her breath uneven. She knew if her parents ever found out what she had done, she could be thrown out, or worse. But her conscience was stronger than her fear. She couldn't let an innocent soul suffer just because of pride and wealth. That night, while her parents slept, Mira quietly sent the voice note to Naledi's phone with a simple message. Listen to this when you're alone. I'm sorry. When Naledi received the message the next morning, she was confused. She slipped outside the hospital room, walked to a quiet corner, and pressed play. As soon as Zuleika's voice filled her ears, her heart sank. Her eyes welled up with tears. It was all true. Every suspicion, every fear, every silent prayer she had cried into her pillow. She stood there, frozen, holding her phone tightly as the audio played again and again in her trembling hands. Each word hit her like a knife. Not only did Zuleika try to kill her, but she was willing to destroy her own son in the process. Naledi didn't speak. She didn't rush to confront them. She didn't scream or cause a scene. She stayed quiet, but her silence was louder than any words. She knew that sometimes revenge wasn't about shouting. It was about timing. It was about letting the truth rise at the right moment. She continued to care for Zubair at the hospital, gently feeding him soup, wiping his forehead, holding his hand through sleepless nights. Everyone saw her love. Even strangers in the hospital admired her strength. Whispers began to spread about the girl who stood tall in silence, about the woman whose heart was purer than gold. But karma never sleeps. While Naledi waited silently, the universe began to set its own plan in motion. People started questioning the strange poisoning. Hospital staff gossiped. The family's image slowly began to crack. Zuleika had no idea that the voice of her own betrayal was sitting quietly in Naledi's phone, waiting like a ticking bomb. And soon, that bomb would explode. It was just before sunset when the final blow was planned. Mr. Baraka, burning with anger and shame over his son's devotion to a girl from the slums, decided that silence was no longer enough. He wanted Naledi gone, completely, forever. He hired a group of ruthless men, paid them handsomely, and gave them just one instruction: make her disappear and leave no trace. That evening, Naledi was walking back home from the hospital after visiting Zubair. The streets were quieter than usual, and she had no idea that shadows were watching her every step. Suddenly, a black van screeched beside her. Before she could scream, a cloth covered her mouth, and everything went dark. When she opened her eyes, her hands were tied, her legs bruised, and her head spinning. She was inside an old, abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. The walls were cracked, the windows broken, and the air smelled of smoke and petrol. Her heart pounded in her chest as she saw men pouring gasoline around the wooden floor, preparing to set the place on fire. She struggled against the ropes, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe this was real. Someone actually wanted to burn her alive. And the worst part, it was Zubair's father who had ordered it. Just then, one of the kidnappers came closer to light the fire, but something stopped him. His eyes locked with Naledi's, and his hands began to tremble. He took a step back, staring at her face like he'd seen a ghost from his past. Then his voice cracked with emotion. "This girl, I know her," he whispered to the others. 2 years ago, my family had nothing. My mother was dying of hunger. This girl, she gave us food when no one else would. She didn't even know our names, but she fed us like we were her own." The other men looked confused, but the boy didn't wait for permission. His eyes were filled with tears as he dropped the matchstick and rushed toward Naledi. Without a word, he untied her ropes and held her hand. "Run," he said. "Now, before it's too late." Naledi, still dizzy and scared, didn't question him. She ran. Her legs ached and her arms were scratched, but she ran with every ounce of strength left in her body. Behind her, she heard the fire catch. Flames roared, smoke filled the air, and the old warehouse turned into a blazing inferno. She stumbled through the dark, coughing, bleeding, her clothes torn, but she was alive. Somehow, against all odds, she had escaped death again. And this time, it was her past kindness that had saved her life. Fate had chosen to repay her in the most unexpected way. That night, while Mr. Baraka and Madame Zuleika slept peacefully, believing the girl was gone forever, Naledi walked barefoot through the silent streets. Wounded, yes, but not broken, and destiny was just getting started. Just 1 week after the failed attempt to kill Naledi, something strange began to happen. something that felt like the universe was finally balancing the scales. It started quietly, almost unnoticed. Mr. Baraka's most important business deal, the one he had spent months preparing, fell apart overnight. The investors pulled out, citing unethical practices. But that was just the beginning. The next morning, the bank sent a notice. All their accounts were frozen, pending a financial investigation. Fraudulent transactions and undeclared assets had been traced back to Mr. Baraka's name. Years of shady dealings had finally come to light, and there was no way to cover it up this time. News spread like wildfire. Then came the real storm. A major media outlet released a report exposing a massive bribery scandal involving Mr. Baraka's company. His pictures were everywhere, on TV, on blogs, in the newspapers. People who once admired his success now called him a thief. His reputation was ruined beyond repair. And as if that wasn't enough, another bombshell exploded. Madame Zuleika's name appeared in a leaked voice recording, the same one Mira had sent to Naledi. Somehow it reached a journalist. The voice note was aired on national radio and television, and the world heard her say it clearly. She must die quietly. No one should trace it back to us. Her voice echoed across the country, shocking everyone who once called her a woman of class and elegance. Newspapers labeled her the wicked socialite behind Poison Plot. People who once stood in line to take selfies with her now crossed the street to avoid her. Friends turned their backs. Her charity events were cancelled. Sponsors disappeared. Even her close relatives stopped answering her calls. The mighty mansion in the hills of Kalonji, seized by the government. The luxury cars, repossessed one by one. The house staff who once obeyed every order, gone. Neighbors who once praised them, now laughed at their downfall. They became the topic of gossip in every market corner, every tea stall, every barber shop. From fame to shame, from luxury to loneliness, they lost everything. And Naledi, the girl they once called a street rat, now walked with her head held high. The same people who had mocked her for selling plantains now greeted her with respect. Her story became an inspiration, a story of love, courage, and how goodness always wins in the end. People started inviting her to speak at events. Her kindness became her crown. She didn't laugh at their downfall. She didn't seek revenge. She simply lived her truth, a truth so powerful that karma itself fought on her behalf. The world had seen it all, how the rich tried to crush a poor girl, but ended up crushed by their own wickedness. And as the dust settled, one thing was clear. What they tried to destroy only grew stronger. Naledi's story spread like wildfire. What was once whispered in corners became headline news. Her name echoed through Kalonji and far beyond. People from all walks of life were touched by her courage. A young girl from a roadside stall who had survived poison, fire, and cruelty, yet still stood with grace. Social media platforms were flooded with her story. They called her the girl who defeated evil with kindness. They called her. People who never knew her now looked up to her. Crowds gathered outside her humble home, not to pity her, but to honor her strength. Women cried watching her interview. Men bowed in respect. Even children called her a hero. One day, a respected NGO, deeply moved by her journey, visited her. They didn't just offer sympathy. They offered her a full scholarship to continue her education, anywhere she wanted. But that wasn't all. They also sponsored a small business for her mother, a modern food cart to sell plantains with better tools, better setup, and more dignity. Naledi's family could finally breathe in peace. Naledi didn't let the fame get to her head. Instead, she used her voice to help others. She started a foundation, a safe space for abused women, girls forced into silence, and victims of domestic violence. She named it Naledi's Light. Within weeks, women across towns reached out to her. Her story had given them strength to speak, to heal, to rise. People no longer saw her as just a poor girl from Kalonji. She had become a symbol of power, of purpose, of light in the darkest times. Meanwhile, Zubair, after fully recovering, had made a choice, the biggest of his life. He walked away from his toxic parents and their wealth. He left the mansion, the luxury, the false status, because he realized none of it mattered without love, peace, and truth. He moved in with Naledi's family, choosing a life built on honesty and hard work. Together, they started from scratch. But this time, they had something no money could buy: real happiness. They built a small home filled with laughter, respect, and love. They supported each other's dreams, and day by day, their bond grew stronger. Zubair worked with Naledi's foundation, helping raise funds and expand its reach. They became a power couple, not of status or wealth, but of heart and impact. People came to them not for favors, but for inspiration. And through it all, Naledi remained the same, humble, kind, grounded. She often stood at her old plantain stall, now upgraded and flourishing, and smiled at the path life had taken her through. She knew pain, she knew betrayal, but she also knew that true love and kindness never go unrewarded. In a world that tried to break her, she became unbreakable. And the boy who chose her over riches, he didn't lose anything, he gained everything. Together, they turned a love story into a legacy. They tried everything to destroy her, poison, threats, fire, all because she was poor, because she came from a roadside stall, because she didn't fit into their world of wealth and pride. But what they didn't know was that no amount of money could kill a pure heart. Naledi's spirit was stronger than their hate, braver than their schemes, and brighter than all their riches combined. They thought poverty made her weak, but it made her powerful. They thought being poor meant she had no worth, but she had something no gold could buy: integrity, courage, and love. She didn't need expensive clothes or fancy titles to prove herself. Her strength was in her kindness, her honesty, her refusal to bend even when life tried to break her. And as for those who plotted her end, the ones who laughed at her, insulted her, tried to bury her, they didn't realize they were only planting a seed, and that seed grew into a mighty tree, taller than their lies, stronger than their evil. One by one, karma knocked on their doors, their wealth vanished, their secrets were exposed, and their pride was crushed. The same hands that tried to end Naledi's life ended up begging for mercy. Zuleika and Baraka, who once ruled the town with their arrogance, became a cautionary tale. People whispered about them with pity, not respect. They walked the same streets they once looked down upon, but this time, with shame on their faces and nothing in their pocket. That is how life works. No evil goes unpunished forever. No cruelty hides in the dark forever. The truth always comes to light. And Naledi, she didn't seek revenge. She didn't celebrate their downfall. She simply moved forward with grace. She built her life with love and let her success speak louder than any revenge ever could. Her story became a lesson, not just in love, but in strength, the kind of strength that only comes from suffering, rising, and never giving up. She proved to the world that goodness may be tested, mocked, and attacked, but it never loses. It may be slow to win, but it always wins. In the end, the girl they called a nobody became an inspiration to everybody, and the boy who chose love over luxury found a life filled with real joy and peace. Together, they showed that love is not about status, it's about sacrifice. That greatness isn't in riches, it's in righteousness. Because in this life, evil may dance for a while, but goodness always takes the crown. And that is the power of a pure heart. If this story touched your heart, if Naledi's pain, strength, and victory moved something deep within you, then don't let it end here. Let her story remind us that no matter how dark the world gets, a pure heart still shines the brightest. Let it remind us that kindness is not weakness, and true love is not measured by wealth, but by sacrifice and loyalty. There are many Nalidis in this world, girls who are judged, hurt, and silenced simply because they were born with less. But just like her, they carry strength that no one sees. Be the voice that stands with them. Be the heart that shares hope. If
Sangi हाल वे ठीक है करूं वडेरे दडे हाल तगड़ी है
ठीक है
घर वाले जाने जरा सारे ठीक है तू ही कहता कर सांगे वीडियो अपने एडवांस शेड्यूल की थी है चलो एक रात घर गुजारी है कौन ही मसला
मेरे को नहीं इतना ठीक है ना वीडियो वाले हम नहीं आ रहे।
दो वीडियो एक चैनल लेना 4 वीडियो तक बनाने में पोसा नहीं करें तू ना बना सकता एक रात से। मैं तो वैसे तेरे पर आदा पे हम भी वैसे ये बंदा तू बात तू बजाना पे हमना सफर देख सारा बाकी साकू के राज सारी जानते के राज सर वैसे होते। चलो भाई कार शहर बना रहे अंदर सारा तक भी ऐसा है ना घर है बस यही सारा घर है तो पीछे घर है कोई वतन वे शो की वीडियो वायरल थी है वीडियो की भाई वायरल थी है अल्लाह खैर करे से तो सबर आज नहीं आया हमने हासिल ये हमारा ऑफिस है। मेरी वीडियो बन रही है क्योंकि मैंने स्टोरी वाली वीडियो पे लगाना है। अपने मोबाइल से वीडियो बना रहा हूँ क्योंकि मैंने वीडियो के एंड पे अपनी वीडियो लगानी है। और मैं ये सब कह रहा हूँ उनसे शाहजहान इधर आ जाओ आपको वीडियो में आ जाओ आप भी इधर आ जाओ। इनसे कहो कि मेरे भाई को आप वायरल करें उनकी वीडियो को वायरल करें। मैं हूँ ना आपका भाई।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम गाइस। अस्सलाम वालेकुम गाइस। आप मेरे भाई को वायरल कर देना और उसके सारे पैसे मुझे देना क्योंकि वो कहता है कि मुझे पैसे चाहिए है ना। बोलो
अब आज जवाब हो गया। आप शाहजहान को बोलने दो उनको समझ नहीं आती। ये अफ्रीकन लोग देखते हैं ना वो तो अंग्रेज हैं। इंग्लिश में नहीं बोलते
हम मुसलमान हैं।
हम मुसलमान हैं वो अंग्रेज हैं पागल। इंग्लिश में नहीं बोलना बस आप आ जाओ। आपने जो बोलना हाय फ्रेंड्स की बच्ची ये देखो हट जाओ खूबसूरत आगे से हट जाओ। वे यार ही ना है ये वीडियो शाहजहान की बन रही है। हाँ आपको अंग्रेज लोग देखेंगे आप बीच में ना आओ वीडियो में ये अच्छी बात नहीं होती ऐसा ना शाहजहान।
ये अंग्रेज हो गया तुम जो समझेगी अंग्रेज क्यों पर काम
हट जा।
अगली बार गुड खेलूंगा तुम्हारी गुड।
ओए ना करो फिर देख।
हाय गाइस मैं हूँ अंग्रेज अबीरा।
अंग्रेज ये हमारी वीडियो बन रही है। ये मेरा शाहजहान छोटा भाई बैठा है मेरे साथ
और ये मैं छोटी मैं